Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we are getting back to work on this custom Stratocaster paint job. We've got this thing all sealed up now. It's looking really nice. We do have to do some sanding now to make sure that everything is nice and smooth, and then it's time to get the color on there. So my next step here is to go in with my sandpaper and just make sure that all of the imperfections are smoothed out before I move on to the color, because some of that stuff will show up in the color, and the earlier you can get rid of any imperfections, the better off you're gonna be. So we're gonna sand this guy back. I'm gonna use 400 and then 800 grit. It's not as important with lacquer that you do this sanding process because lacquer melts into itself. It bonds chemically instead of mechanically. So there's no issue with adhesion like normal. And for that same reason, it doesn't matter as much what grit you use. You can get it nice and smooth and it will still bind. Whereas if you're doing, for example, a poly over poly and you sand with 2000 grit in between, you run the risk of that delaminating because it's just there's not enough for it to grab onto. With this, that's not going to be an issue. So we're going to start with sanding, and then the next step, we're going to go ahead and get all of our color work done in this. This is a 2-coat system that we're using. It's not actually just 2 coats, but it's 2 different layers. So it's going to be a base green and a really nice one, and then we're going to go over it with a transparent gold pearl to give it some glint. So at some angles it's just going to look green, and then as you shift it, you're going to see gold. You're going to see kind of gold around the edges and stuff, and as you tilt it, you'll see gold across the face. It's going to look really nice. Really cool customer request on this one. So we're going to start off with our sanding, make sure that everything's good to go, and then we'll move on to the spraying. I'm going to move into voiceover now and fire up the compressor, and we'll get to work on this. So we are going to blast through the sanding part here because, let's be honest, nobody likes watching that. It's boring. But anyway, I'm sanding this. I've got a block. My block is literally just a piece of wood in this case. It's kind of a pain in the butt keeping all of the sandpaper clean while you do this, but it's important to do that. If you let a bunch of stuff build up on it, it's going to leave scratches, and that's not what you want. You want it to look good. So there are some really high quality sandpapers out there that work a little bit better and kind of prevent that. But if you're careful, you can still do it. And this is what I had available to me, so I end up going through a little bit more sandpaper than I otherwise would, but that's okay. Using a compressor to help blow it off also speeds things up nicely. So a lot of pressure going through that in a small nozzle will actually blow the crap off of the sandpaper pretty quick, and you can see how much faster that's working for me. Again, just running this at like 300% speed so you guys don't have to watch me sand for a ridiculous amount of time. But keep in mind, this is a long process. It's a big part of the project, and it's an important part. If you don't do this properly, then you're not going to end up with a nice, smooth, flat finish. And I think most of you want that, so get your sanding done. I'm using 600 grit paper, I believe, for this. You can use anything kind of in the 400 to 800 grit range to do this flattening work. And like we talked about, because it's lacquer, you can go higher than that if you want. It really doesn't matter as much because it'll bind to itself anyway. Even though we're spraying this over the vinyl sealer, that chemical reaction is still going to happen. Here I'm using my palm to get into that cutaway area because obviously it's not flat, so a block doesn't make sense. And I'm just using my fingers around the areas that I absolutely have to. I prefer not to. If you sand a lot with your fingers on flat surfaces, you can leave grooves. But it's okay for the roundovers, of course, because, I mean, well, you got to be able to do them somehow. I use a block as much as possible, though, for all of the flat stuff because it gets it flat, and that is what you want. A rubberized block or something like an eraser is great for doing that carve from this side. You can use those on the carve from the back as well, as long as they're flexible enough and you don't put too much pressure on the outsides because it's fighting that flex on them. That kind of thing is very helpful for curved surfaces, but I find that using my palm generally works pretty well. Anyway, I'm going to kind of jump ahead here. You don't need to see me sand everything, but once I'm done working with the block, I often like to come back and just kind of smooth everything out a little bit with the dual action sander. I know that sounds silly, but I'm using 800 grit here instead of 600, so it's just making everything a little bit smoother and making sure that there are no spots that haven't been touched, nothing that hasn't been properly abraded. These slightly flexible dual action sanders are also okay for getting into these carves, so it's nice having that option available. It works pretty well for that. Once this is abraded, I clean it off, and then it's time to get moving on the spray. So this is the base green that I'm using. It's a custom mixed color that the client requested. In fact, I didn't mix it. He went to the paint shop and had them test it out for him because he wanted to make sure that we had the right stuff for the paint job.
So this is the base, and I'm going over this with a pearl after. This part is all in real time. So I sped up the sanding, but this is not sped up at all. This is actually how fast I lay down kind of my base lacquer coats. That they're going on real thin, and that's what you want for nitrocellulose. It dries crazy fast. You can go over it again basically immediately. I've got my booth pulling the fumes, and we've got some airflow in here, so that flashes off pretty much instantly. That went on just a touch dry, so I'm making sure that everything is clean. There is an issue occasionally with nitro kind of, drying on the tip, but usually it's pretty good stuff. I thin mine about 50% usually for this kind of base coat work. So I'm just testing it out, doing a little bit of setup. You want to make sure you're not getting any stippling and that you're not pumping out too much paint. But if you're throwing more paint, you can just move a little quicker. So it's not always an issue. You just have to accommodate for it in the way that you spray. So you can see how fast I'm spraying with this. And that's how I generally do these. If I were using a smaller gun that put out less paint, you would see me moving a little bit slower. This gun is the 904 HE, I believe, from Warwick. It's my favorite lacquer gun. If you're looking for one, there is a link in the description. There should be a discount code there. I'm not sure if it still works at this point, but give it a try if you want one of these. So second coat goes on here. You can see that the wood grain is kind of starting to disappear a little bit better. It's pretty much gone at this point, so I've reached almost full opacity, but I'm going to do one or two more of these real quick before we move on, because you don't want to go back after, especially after you've put on your next color, which for me is a transparent. You don't want to go back and see wood grain at some angles. So I'm going to do one more, I think, on here, and that's about full opacity. I just shoot a little bit of air at it, make sure it's tacked up properly, and then I finish it off. I skipped the edge work on this part of the video because you've seen me do it a couple times now, but that's going to be our last color coat, and I put this one on just a little bit heavier because I need to go change paint now, so it's going to have more time to dry between coats anyway. You don't need to wait a crazy amount of time. Some people wait a day between nitro coats. That's one thing for clear coat, but when you're just lightly putting on base like this, you don't really need to do that. So now I'm going in with the gold pearl on here. This is what's really going to make this thing interesting. It's essentially just a nitrocellulose clear mixed with some gold. It's the same compound, so people get a little confused about the difference between the paint and the clear when it comes to nitro, and really it's the same thing. You just have pigments and or pearls or dyes mixed in when you're doing the paint work, and then the clear doesn't have any of that. Anyway, this is going on in a very similar fashion. I need to make sure that I get this even, because if I don't, if I try too hard to get too much on there at once and I leave streaks, you're going to be able to see that this stuff doesn't build opaque, so anywhere that it overlaps is going to have more gold, and that's going to look kind of silly. Once I've got that first coat on there, I realized that there's a little bit of kind of a waving effect in there, and that's something that showed up on the sample that the client got, and he didn't want that, so that's totally fair. But often when you build a finish this way, you'll need to sand the base coat down before you put the pearl on, and that's not so that it'll stick. With nitro, that's not an issue. It's so that you've got a nice flat surface to shoot the gold at. Otherwise, when you've got a little bit of orange peel or any kind of waviness, that pearl collects in the low spots, and then you see that in your finished product, whether it's flat or not. I should have showed you guys the sample that came out of the shop. They just did their spraying for the color, so that wasn't an issue on their part. But for this, I wanted to make sure that wouldn't happen, so I'm going back and sanding off the gold and just making sure that everything is nicely flattened out here so that it's not going to be a problem. And for this, you do want to use a high grit paper. I'm using 800. I would suggest not going any coarser than that. 800 will get it flattened out reasonably quickly and is smooth enough for this purpose, but if you use like a 400 or something like that, then you could potentially see that pearl settling into those scratches a little bit too as you move on, and that's not something that you want. So now we're coming back. I believe I'm on my second coat here. There's already some gold on here. You can see when I turn this thing, but anyway, I'm coming back in with my second coat of gold. Not sure why I didn't film the first one, but I didn't. And as I shift this thing around, you'll see kind of that gold shimmer around the corners and edges, and that look changes a little bit as you move the thing. So I I've got a few pictures and videos on Instagram from when I was doing this. If you want to check it out, I didn't get a great shot of it for this video, but I'm sure you get the idea. You can see even with me holding it like that you get some gold shimmer around that carve and on the entire face as I move the guitar around. And once you get this part done, it's just a matter of going in with the clear coat, which I do in a very similar fashion, but I leave a little bit more time between coats and I apply it a little heavier. I think I did 5 or 6 coats of clear on this one. Make sure you're wearing a mask anytime you're spraying this stuff, anytime you're spraying anything, but particularly this kind of thing, make sure you are wearing a mask. This stuff smells like it's killing you. It smells like instant cancer. And yes, as I've said before, that's how you know it's working, but it will actually kill you. So don't let it do that. Protect yourself. Pretty straightforward. I've had a lot of questions lately about what masks are adequate. I'm no expert on that. I frankly don't really know. I know if you're in an automotive shop, you use an air-fed mask. I also assume if you're coming to me for advice, you don't work in an automotive shop and probably don't have an air-fed mask. So that's fine. But get something with fume canisters on it, not just particulate filters. You want that like NOS 95 or something like that. You want something that's going to actually filter out fumes. So it's got to have the carbon filters on the side or in the front, and then that should hopefully, well, keep you safe. And also make sure you've got a good seal. That's part of the problem with having a beard. Occasionally, I'll just realize I've been breathing in clear coat through the gap between my beard and my mask, and my beard's got all this plastic junk in it. Fun times. Yeah, really combs out nicely, which is part of why I usually trim it a little bit when I'm going for a big spray session. Anyway, so we got all of our gold on there, and then I did, like I said, probably 6 coats of clear. If you're burying graphics or anything like that, you're going to have to do a bit more. If you're really aggressive with the sander, you're going to have to do a bit more, but for me, 6 was just fine. And here I am with my Dynabrite Sander again. You guys can find that in the Amazon link in the description if you're looking for one. And some Mirka Abralon pads. I think I've got 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000. Again, available in the description. You don't need to use something like this, though. You can do all of this by hand. You just need to go in and make sure that you're, 1, being careful, and 2, have high enough grits. So you can do it by hand on a block. You'll get a good finish that way. Just takes a little extra work. And in fact, it's probably, although it's harder from a labor perspective, it's probably easier from a skills perspective. So don't hesitate to give that a try. You don't need to be buying a sander to get this sort of job done. Simple as that. What you may want to buy, though, is a polisher, because polishing is a little bit more challenging to get enough friction and speed to get it to polish properly. So consider whether you need to get a polisher. With nitrocellulose lacquer, you may not need to. Some of you are probably pretty strong. Some of you are really used to just rubbing things real hard, so you're going to be just fine. Please forgive that joke. But anyway, for the rest of you, a polisher will make things easier. They are available in electric and pneumatic. So if you don't have a compressor, if you're doing your job with spray cans, that's fine. You can get an electric one. I have a bigger electric one that I use for larger projects. I think it's a Porter and cable. It's also in the description. But for these little guitars, I like to use my handheld one, and then I don't have to worry about anything holding my guitar still. I can hold it with one hand and polish with the other. So you can see this is starting to look real glossy, nice and smooth. And yeah, this turns into actually a beautiful finish. I'm pretty jealous of this one because it's just got such a cool effect when you move it around. And that custom color is just awesome. But more importantly, the client's happy with it, because let's be honest, he's the one paying for it. Nobody cares what I think. So he's happy, I'm happy. Simple as that. Now, in terms of the polishing process itself here, I've done a few tutorials on it. You've probably all seen them, or maybe haven't, who knows. So I'm using a couple of items here. This first compound that I'm using is the Norton Liquid Ice. I know it's a one-step system. It works really well. I know a lot of you have used it at my recommendation, and I've gotten a ton of positive feedback, so I continue to recommend that one. It's fairly easy to work with. It's not insanely expensive, like trying to go through a full 3M system or anything like that. It's just an all-around good choice. But to get kind of a slightly finer finish, I start with that, and I start with a couple of my more aggressive pads here. These are the Chemical Brothers pads, I believe, also available in the description in that Amazon link. So is the Norton Liquid Ice. helps me out if you pick stuff up through there, so feel free to do that if you want to help me. So in order to get a finer finish after I'm done with the Northern Liquid Ice, I come in with this blue stuff. This is the ultra fine machine polish from 3M. This is the final stage in the 3M polishing system. So it's not part of the same system. It's not necessarily designed to go with the Norton Liquid Ice, but I find that the Norton product kind of accomplishes the whole deal and really gets through at least the first 2 stages of the 3M system, and then I come in at the last stage with this stuff to just finish it off and get that beautiful gloss kind of up to the highest degree that I can. I should also point out that I am working my way up through a number of different pads as I do this. So you will have seen me start with a couple colored ones, then move on to the white one, and then finally the black one. What happens there is the pads get kind of finer and softer as you go. When you get these, they come in a big set with a whole bunch, and they tell you what's for what, but really the key there is the harder ones do kind of the dirty work at the beginning with the compound, and then you use the really soft ones at the end with the polish to make sure you're not creating any scratches or anything. And they finish the job off and really give you that mirror sheen at the end. It's also important to clean off any excess polish as you go, clean off any compound. You can see it doesn't take a whole lot of polish to do this. But anyway, it's important to clean that stuff off because the polish and the compound are both abrasives. Let's keep that in mind. That's how they do this job. They're much like sandpaper, but liquid and way, way, way finer, and they just abrade it to a perfectly smooth mirror finish. So if you leave compound on there and then you try and go in with your polish, you're going to have the compound scratches still. That'd be like putting 120 mesh garnet under your 400 grit sandpaper and trying to rub that around. You're going to end up with the bigger scratches. So make sure you're cleaning it off as you go, or at least wiping it off so that you don't have to worry about that. And wipe off even the same product. Wipe that off as you go. If you leave it on, you can see there's some cloudiness on the surface as I'm doing it. That's not a problem, but it's nice to kind of be able to see that shine. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to check out the last one if you haven't. If you did enjoy it, please feel free to give it a thumbs up. Actually helps me out when you do that, and I appreciate it. Remember to subscribe so you can see the next project, and yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks again. See you next time.